Hi everyone, welcome to part 5 in our series on the Sabbath. If you have been following along, I hope this has been challenging to you, meaningful to you. I hope you're getting a better sense of just the significance of Sabbath and what God desires to do in our lives during a Sabbath break. Well, in today's episode, I want to look in at a very key passage among the prophets. And this is going to be our last episode where we're really just camping in the Hebrew Scriptures and the Older Testament. Next week, we're going to jump in with Jesus, which is going to be really cool to talk about how Jesus engaged the Sabbath and what he had to say about it. But what I want to do for this episode is, in order to get to this very critical passage from the prophets, I want to begin back at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20, but not in verses 8 through 11, which is where the Sabbath commandment is, but actually in the first commandment. And I then want to read to you a quote from a really brilliant scholar by the name of Walter Brueggemann. Wrote a book called Sabbath as Resistance, and it's one of the resources that I have linked underneath this teaching, and in fact all of the teachings on the Sabbath. So I've got like 10 fabulous books on Sabbath that I would recommend any of the 10, but I know that would be very overwhelming, so I've recommended 4 that kind of tackle various aspects of Sabbath. So take a look at those. But he mentions something about how the Sabbath commandment is related to all of the other commandments, particularly those in the top 10 of the 10 commandments. And so let me just read to you from Exodus 20, 1 to 3. So it's got the intro and then the very first commandment, and then we'll hear what Brueggemann has to say. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Okay, there's our intro. Here's the first one. You shall have no other gods before me. Now notice what Brueggemann writes in connection to this commandment and the Sabbath. He says the first commandment is a declaration that the God of the Exodus is unlike all the gods the slaves have known before. This God is not to be confused with or thought parallel to the insatiable gods of imperial productivity. This God is subsequently revealed as a God of mercy, steadfast love, and faithfulness who is committed to covenantal relationships of fidelity. At the taproot of this divine commitment to relationship, covenant, rather than commodity, bricks, is the capacity and willingness of this God to rest. Now, in the last episode, we talked about this idea of commodity in Egypt. This is what Brueggemann is referencing, the bricks here, the life of Pharaoh, or the life that Israel had in relationship to Pharaoh. That Pharaoh was all about commodity. He was all about production and consumption represented in bricks. But what Brueggemann says is this is not a God like for us. God is not a God of commodity. This is a God of covenant. This is a God of relationship. And so he can take a break. He can set this example because for God, his relationship to us is supreme in how we interact with him, not in what we can produce. And so what I love about this quote from Brueggemann is just the reality that the idea of commodity, the idea of production and consumption, can be something that is totally at odds with us and our relationship to God. And we see this being played out in the book of Amos with the prophet Amos. And as we get there, I want to show you just this timeline again of the restoration of all things, this teaching I did on Genesis 1 to Revelation 22, and just how Israel moved on from being at Mount Sinai and how they then struggled to live out their identity and calling that God had for them in the world. And what's fascinating is that after Solomon, you have the divided kingdom, and both of the kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south, are going to fall. Right? The northern kingdom to Assyria in 722 BC, the southern kingdom, most notably the date of 586 to Babylon. But when you scan the prophets, and the prophets are gap closers, prophets come on the scene and they say, this is what God wants, this is how you're living, there's a gap, we need to close the gap. And because Israel was constantly struggling to live in tune to the reality God wanted them to do, you have all of these different prophets. And one of the things the prophets highlight that was a strong indicator that the people's relationship to God was skewed was their lack of observing the Sabbath the way God was asking them to do it. It is riveting how significant Sabbath is to an indication of a person's health. And Amos is a prophet who lived in the southern kingdom. He was a shepherd from Tekoa, which is south of Jerusalem, but he actually prophesied to the northern kingdom prior to their fall. In fact, he is in the first half of the 8th century BC, is that he is speaking to the northern kingdom. And here is a passage from Amos 8, 4 through 5, that is so revealing of the people's condition. Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat, skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales. And then Amos actually goes on from there to talk about how people are oppressing others, after the Sabbath. And, there's so much going on here. But with the reference to the Sabbath, we're seeing here that the people have such a jacked up understanding of the Sabbath, such a jacked up understanding of their relationship to God, that during the Sabbath day, they are begging for it to be over. Like they want to go and make money. They want to buy and sell in the marketplace. But it's not just the fact that they want to buy and sell. It's the fact that they're actually doing it as a way to cheat out those who don't have a say in the matter. It's like Sabbath is connected to just how destructive the relationship between the people and God has become, but also the relationship they have with one another. And one of our prior episodes, we talked about how when God says in the Sabbath commandment, like this is for you, this is for your son and daughter, this is for your male and female servant, this is for the foreigner within your gates, like everybody was supposed to cease on Sabbath. And it was a day where everyone was to be equal in their rest. It was a reminder that there is a common humanity, that all of the different ways that society segments people and socially, puts them in these hierarchies, Sabbath was a day to put everybody on equal ground because everybody was resting. Nobody was producing. Nobody was consuming. It was all about being reminded, right, of the things we've talked about in the previous episodes about trust and identity and rhythm and all these things that God wanted to do. But here we see just how fundamentally jacked up everything is. That the relationship with one another is fractured because they're not allowing the Sabbath to do a work in their soul in order to see the error in the ways that they're conducting during the rest of the week. And you could say even on the Sabbath. And so when I was kind of thinking through this and going, man, we could do a whole teaching just on how a lack of observing the Sabbath is a massive social injustice in all the ways that it can just plague a society. And that would be a really cool one to do. I would just reference you to Sabbath as Resistance by Brueggemann because he tackles so much of that and is so cool. What I got to thinking about was what could we take home for us? Like how does this, from 2,800 years ago, how does that impact our lives? And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about this just in terms of just how distracted the people were, how blurred their vision was to understand the error of their ways. Like they just couldn't see clearly. And I thought about this in terms of one of my kids. So this is Calix. He's 7 years old. He's one of my 4 kiddos. And this is on a recent speaking engagement that he got to come along with, which was so cool for us to do. And I love my boy Calix. And Calix is the only one of my kids who wears glasses regularly. And one of the very common occurrences in our household, or even if I'm just out and about with him, is I will look over to talk to him, and it's like I can hardly see his eyes. and I'll say, Calyx, let me see your glasses. And I kid you not, I just took this picture from these glasses. So he's got 2 pairs of glasses. He broke one, we had to replace, we had to wait on it, whole thing. But these are the glasses that, no, he's not wearing these glasses in this photo, but you can actually see they're a little fuzzy right there. Is I just took a photo of these glasses, and this is what they look like. Like, I can hardly see his eyes. I don't know how he sees out. Like, he just has to do this like with sonar or something because it is so foggy. There's so many smudges on his glasses. I'm like, Calyx, when was the last time you cleaned those? The answer is the last time I asked him to clean his glasses because I couldn't see him at that point either. And I thought, what a great picture for us in connection to Sabbath. That there are all of these things that happen during the other 6 days that smudge our glasses. And it's little by little by little by little. And unless we have a day where we clean the glasses, where we just take off all the smudges, we learn to live with deficits that we don't even realize are affecting us. And I believe one of those biggest deficits is around the idea of commodity and bricks, namely in the form of what we consume as well as what we're thinking about producing. And so as I've been thinking about this in my own journey and going, what does this look like for us? I would like to submit to you that one of the best ways, in fact, probably the most helpful way that you can clean your glasses on the Sabbath is by completely neglecting everything associated with this thing right here, the cell phone. That I have found that this has become one of the biggest competitors for me observing the Sabbath and having my glasses cleaned. And here's what I mean by that. We've all got cell phones. I mean, I know many of you are watching this from all over the world. I know you have cell phones or you've got something, that you could equate this with. This, I believe, is the most detrimental commodity device for us on the Sabbath. Now, I say that on the Sabbath. I'm not saying that for the other 6 days of the week. I think we have to be very careful about how we deal with technology. That like anything, technology has its pros and it has its cons. But particularly I want to talk about the Sabbath. Is that if you pick up your phone on the Sabbath day, right, you have access to everything. And let's just start going through some of the things you have access to. You have access to email, right? Just that inquisitiveness. Like email is one of those things that it is on the one hand great and on the other hand, it's awful, right? It's just like there's just endless emails that we constantly get in. And so sometimes what overwhelms us is not knowing what's in our email box because we're curious, how much time am I going to have to put in this? So you hit the button and all of a sudden you start seeing emails, right? And it's an email that reminds you of the work you're supposed to do. So the very break that you're taking from work to be reminded that your worth doesn't come from your work is now brought back into view even in a split second. If you go, I'm not even going to respond to emails, I'm just going to check them really quick, right? Or one of those emails comes in and it says 25% off sale this weekend only. Right now, FOMO, fear of missing out. And you're like, well, before I, opened my email, I didn't really think I needed that thing, but maybe I do need that. And I know that their site says it's 25% off, but then you click the Amazon app and you're going, I wonder what it's like on Amazon. Is it cheaper there? And do I need that? And what are the reviews like? And then all of a sudden there's all these other suggestions. And before you know it, you spent 50 minutes, an hour, hour and a half. I don't know why I started with 50. That's so random, by the way. You spend all this time looking at something that you don't need or you don't need to think about on the Sabbath day, right? Or for some of you, it's like, well, I'll just go check social media. This is my way to unwind. Like I am taking a break and this is the way that I can just relax. Well, I got a buddy of mine by the name of Curtis Zachary, or CZ, and he recently released a book called Soul Rest. And he makes an observation that when I read it, I was like, yes, I've had that conversation so many times with myself, but with other people. And this is what he writes. He says, I believe that many people would say that their use of technology and social media is a way to unwind and disconnect from the stress of what is going on in their regular daily lives. But it doesn't take long in many of the conversations that I've had where people confess how much stress and anxiety is introduced into their lives via these mediums. Yeah. Like for many of us, like we pick up our phone and we start scrolling through Facebook or Instagram, or we're looking at things on Pinterest, or, we're on Twitter or whatever the social media platform is. And all of a sudden you start seeing what everybody else is doing. And you start feeling like, man, I am one pathetic loser. Failing to be reminded that people's social media accounts are generally their highlight reel. Like it's the best of the best, and it's not always real time, right? It's like a compilation of things that they're doing, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I should be doing something, and why am I taking a break here? And now all of a sudden you start thinking about all the things that you aren't doing, or you see all these photos of what moms and dads are doing. You're like, I'm a bad mom, I'm a bad dad, I don't do that with my kids, or man, I haven't done that. And all of a sudden it's like this stress and anxiety inducing thing in this day that's supposed to help you to clean the glasses, to be, to take all those smudges of all the remarks during the week in which you're told through marketing and through people and through, your boss or whatever, that you just don't quite cut it. And you've got all these messages, and we just keep adding more smudges to our glasses because we're unable to put this thing down. And friends, I would just plead with you to think very critically about how you use technology on the Sabbath. There is good uses for it. I'm recording this right now on my phone. This thing has a really great use for me on lots of different fronts. But when it comes to Sabbath, this thing, I got to cease from this if I'm truly going to rest. Now, I'm not so dogmatic that if, my mom calls me or my dad calls me, like I'm just not going to talk to them. Sometimes if it's not urgent, I'll call them back the next day. Or, if one of my good friends is just going through something and they send me a text, but I don't have this on me. I will check it a couple of times during the day just to see if there's anything that I need to be aware of. And even then, I'm questioning whether that's even the smartest use of my engagement with technology. But this is something that I believe Walter Brueggemann just absolutely nails, that if we can be critical about how we use technology and how we think about our own desires of production and consumption and what we're taking in and what we're thinking about and how we do what we do, it will expose very significant things in our lives. And this is what he says, again, Sabbath as Resistance, page 88. We'll end with this. It occurs to me that Sabbath is a school for our desires, an expose and critique of the false desires that focus on idolatry and greed that have immense power for us. When we do not pause for Sabbath, these false desires take power over us. That, friends, when I'm doing Sabbath well and my glasses get cleaned, I am so objective on the other 6 days of the week. I see things that I don't normally see. I question things that I do. I bring into question certain spending habits, and why do I need that, and what is driving that, and why did I schedule that, and why am I doing so much, and why didn't I say no to that, and man, I'm not spending enough time with my kids, during the week, or I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, because it's like when I can just pause and allow my glasses to be cleaned, right? The desires that I have that are vying for my soul, that pit me against my relationship to God, the desires of consumption and production and all of this, they get caught. And I believe God exposes them for what they are, and they begin to lose power, and you start to see just how freeing and how clear the Sabbath becomes when we live in tune to it, and we just completely disassociate ourselves from the world of bricks, of consumption and production, and we just let God do a work in us on the Sabbath day. So friends, that's what I would challenge you with, is just how you allow things to inform you during the Sabbath. Take stock of those and figure out, are these things actually bringing me closer to God, or are they actually pushing me further away? This is a God of relationship, not a God of commodity. And this is a God in our relationship with Him who wants to help us to clean our glasses. So friends, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for stopping by. If you've got questions on any of this or any of the previous episodes, drop your questions underneath the episodes. We're going to do an episode at the end where I'm going to answer the questions. Again, there are resources listed underneath all of the episodes if you want to go deeper with this idea of Sabbath. And next week, we're going to jump into Jesus. It's going to be a blast. So thanks again for stopping by. May you walk out the text well in your life.